I want to welcome everyone on behalf of cf3 and the 20th Century Cincinnati show. cf3 kind of started as a little bit of a support group for people, and we bounce ideas off of each other all the time, and we just thought maybe we'd take it public and share some ideas on a little bit of a bigger scale and field questions while we're at it. So that's kind of the point of what we're doing today. Our guest host today is Jay Shatz. Jay's an Emmy Award-winning television producer, former reporter with Channel 9. He was there for over 11 years. And he now owns the Covington-based company JTV, which produces shows for HGTV and the DIY network. Next month will be the 8th season of Jay's Curb Appeal Invasion series called Desperate Landscapes. I think Arlen and I were on maybe the first year. Disgruntled neighbors, that's a lot of fun. It focuses on helping homeowners who have an unfortunate distinction of being labeled as the sore thumb on the block. In just 8 hours, Jay and his team take tragic front yards from worst to first. And the good news is that they'll be shooting in Cincinnati again this summer, so if you're looking, they're looking for tragic front yards to fix. Jay's company is also testing a new series that you may be interested in called Smash Away the Ugly, where you get handed a sledgehammer and anything you smash, the TV folks fix. So that's another focus of what we're going to go over today, maybe what should be smashed and what would be better to save. So with that, I will give you Jay and he'll take it from you.
Well, thank you. I have the easiest job today, working with this panel and fielding the questions. And really what we're going to talk about is that incredibly frustrating, challenging balance of owning a mid-century home, something that you love, something that appealed to you, the reason that you're there, why you bought it, and now you're faced with, oh my gosh, how do I get some closet space? And how in the world do I cook a meal in this fabulous, beautiful home? And how do I fill it with furniture that's appropriate and matches? So that's what really we're going to talk about. Like Susan says, cf3 was founded as kind of this giant support group therapy for everybody dealing with those issues and those challenges. We have a great panel to talk about that and to take your questions. Architect, and when I say your name, please raise your hand so everybody knows who you are. Architect and cf3 board member Lou Batsch.
Yep.
Architect and cf3 board member Fritz Kuhlmann. Architect and cf3 co-founder and board member Chris Magee. Designer and furniture expert David Smith. Designer and collector Judith Kuhlmann. And the two of them have fought over things at resale shops. I've listened to them going back and forth over, the word steal has been used a couple of times. And Midcentury realtor and cf3 co-founder or board member, and my wonderful neighbor, Susan Rissover. So let's get started, and we actually have visual aids to help us today. So let's take a look at our first slide. And we're going to talk about furniture and restoration of furniture. We have two tables that have varying degrees of damage. David, this one's for you. One is a Noguchi table with a chip out of the edge. The other is an anonymous Danish table. We would really like to restore the Noguchi table. Since the Danish table has so much damage, would it be appropriate to put a Formica top on?
I'll deal with this as kind of a two-parter. First of all, specifically with regard to these tables, on this Noguchi cyclone table, this particular table is a good table. So if you're going to do something, it's really imperative that you do it with care. You work with people who are sensitive to the needs of doing this type of restoration, and you use appropriate materials. During the period that this was made, both Knoll and Herman Miller, Knoll being the manufacturer of this table, used something called furniture-grade laminate, which was this kind of a middle ground between something really matte and something really glossy. So no one makes, quote, furniture-grade laminate anymore, but Wilson Art and a couple of companies, if you take your sample, you can get really close. So if you get really close and sensitively redo a white top on that, it's not something that will significantly alter the value of the table, and it's going to make it far more usable and presentable. With regard to the second table, unfortunately, having a veneer top on this table with this much damage is going to preclude it from being really restore it in a way that you can keep the wood, unless you went to great expense, probably far exceeding the value of the table, to actually re-veneer it. So in this case, you could have fun with this table, and you could put a white laminate top. I think it would be great because there were a lot of mid-century people, particularly the Danish modern style pieces that were made in America, that would have this walnut and white laminate contrast. So a table like this would be wholly appropriate for $100, $150 to put a white laminate top. And real quickly, both of these bring up a point that I'm asked often, and that is how or why or should I restore my mid-century furniture? And the easy answer is this. When you see Antiques Roadshow, they're like, oh, the original finish, don't touch this. If you hadn't done this, you're ruining the value. And unless you have a museum quality piece, if you find something, or if you have something that is in deplorable condition, if you sensitively restore that using the same materials and the processes in which it was done in the first place, and finish it in a way that it was actually offered by that particular designer or maker in the first place, you only enhance the value of that piece. Now, it will never be the value of a mint pristine example, but if you have trash and you bring it up to a great level for a little bit of effort and a little bit of money, you're doing yourself a favor, you're doing the collecting gods a favor, and you've got a great piece that you can have in your home.
Judith, as a collector, what do you think of that answer and that piece?
I completely concur, because I think that when you have, like you said, a museum piece, then you do need to be really cognizant of who you're dealing with. You need to have, maybe consult one of the local people such as David in town and ask them if they have a restoration person they like to work with before you actually go and just have someone haphazardly stitching something together or reupholstering something or refinishing something. I think it's always good to consult an expert to make sure that you have the proper person. And I believe even Susan has, don't you have like something, you make comments with regards to Angie's list on who to work with and stuff like that. So it might be something along the line where you can consult one of the people that you're working with or someone like David to find out, who should I take my piece to. As far as the other products, I agree with David. I think you should just have a little fun with it. Not everything is museum quality, and not everything is, sometimes it's just the form, that is fun and exciting. Not everything, just like today, you have your very expensive furniture, and then you have your furniture that's kind of trendy or whatever. You have more fun with that. So,
a quick question. Can you go back to that picture? I was just curious. What would you guys think would be a reasonable price to have that refinished, and what would it be worth?
Well, we don't have the photo of the side view of that table, I don't believe here, but I have seen it. The table, to my knowledge, is not by any particular maker or any particular designer of note. So in that case, you really get a nice look piece, a piece that you can use as a functional utilitarian table. So if you don't have much, if anything, invested in a table, for you to spend $100 to $150, depending on with whom you might deal, to have it with a laminate top, maybe take a little bit of furniture restore and work up the underside of the table. For less than $200, you've got a great looking functional table that if you went to any number of resale shops, vintage dealers, you couldn't buy that table for, let's say, $200. So there's a lot of value in that.
Okay. Talk about collecting, something that you do.
yes, and I need a 12-step program for that. My husband and I often say we need to go to counseling, and we often refer to some of our vendor friends as our pushers. So those of you here today, I'm sure, are in the same predicament, or you wouldn't be here today. My first thing I want to say to you about collecting is collect what you love. Never approach collecting something because you feel like it would be a good value or it might appreciate over time, because regardless of that, if you don't love it, you don't want it in your house. There are things that you can find everywhere. If you've done any kind of searching through junk stores or Goodwill or anything like that, you can kind of see the same pieces over and over again. I think David and I talked, and we think, I think the fun thing would maybe focus on something that isn't so commonplace, that makes it more of a rush when you find it, and more of a challenge to really look for it. The one thing that I've been preparing for to talk about today is that I've been going through eBay and Etsy and some of these other sites, and I've noticed that there's a huge variance in price points on some of the same items. And the one thing I want to mention is, I think you need to be cognizant of regional, sometimes when you're looking at like eBay or something, one item maybe out of California will be much more expensive than the same item here in Cincinnati or whatever. So I think you need, it's because it's often regionally based. They always said back in the day when people were collecting rookwood, it's much more expensive here because people have a deeper appreciation for it here. So I think you need to shop and you need to think about what you're looking at. And I think that there are some unique pieces now I just went on the internet and I just pulled some thoughts and ideas. I think one of the most important thing about collecting is to view it as a form and a shape. Because you can buy something that's not super expensive. For instance, well, go back to the other one. That little pot up in the left-hand corner, that's not necessarily a very expensive item, but what that is it has a really beautiful shape to it. It's a form. And the thing about Midcentury is everything is very simplistic in its form. The wire is unique. You can do a bunch of fun things like that. I found some really nice, inexpensive block print artwork, which is very, Mid-century. The carved birds and the animals, the op art from West Germany, which is the white product. These you can find in the $50 ranges and that kind of thing. And I think it's a really fun way to start your collection, especially if you're not really sure how you want to do it. So,
where did you find these?
I just found those like on Etsy and eBay. I just went through to collect some images.
And you said the price point is in the 50 range?
Well, like in the white pottery, it's like in the 50s price points. In the carved animals, it's like in the 50s price points. The wire, that's more of a famous piece. That's going to be more expensive. But point being is there's a lot of different ways you can go. Metal, art, ceramic, pottery, glass.
This is beautiful.
The bird up in the top is actually lucite. And it's by a man called Abraham Kuhlmann. So you can do enamels, you can do it, there's just a number of things, jewelry. This is a vintage jewelry piece out of a company from Miami. Renoir and Matisse did a lot of designs for them, but you can still pick them up. I can go on forever.
I know that Judith and I discussed this when we put this panel together. The couple of points that I know we both wanted to stress is, like she said, collect what you love, collect from a point of knowledge. If you're going to bother to search and to find and to buy, spend a little bit of time, do some research on the internet, see if there are books you can buy, talk to knowledgeable dealers, find out about what you're collecting, and you're never going to be sorry if you can buy the best that you can buy. There is quality at every price point. It's better to buy one good piece than 3 pieces of crap, and you never will regret buying that quality.
Before we move on to the topic, words of warning as far as scams, rip-offs, frauds, fakes, phonies.
Well, there's always going to be frauds, fakes, and phonies. I mean, there's a lot of pieces, like especially with pottery, there's a lot of people out there that are passing off some pottery, and the thing that pops in my head, which is really not mid-century, but Roseville and stuff like that, a lot of it's reproduced now. So just be sure that you talk to someone before you invest a lot of the money. I know there's some Van Briggle out there that you can tell from the different places on the bottom whether or not it's authentic and it's not authentic. So I think you just need to, before you spend a great deal of money, I just think you need to consult someone and say, is this legit? Take pictures, ask questions. And like David said, the internet's a plethora of knowledge, and we just get on there and research it.
But cross-check.
Cross-check.
Just because it's on the internet.
No, it doesn't mean it's right. I'm just saying, don't go to an eBay site and listen to what they say, because sometimes they're just trying to sell a product,
Any questions before we move on about the collecting, or you can come back to that? Yep.
Can you just take the veneer off that table and then remove
You
the adhesive?
could have it taken off, but if you want a really nice piece of American walnut or something to match that, unless you just happen to know somebody that had a little left over, a couple of flitches, if you bought a flitch large enough to cover that table, you're going to be at least at the high $200, if not $300 plus the labor to do it, you know, and suddenly you're into a table for $400 or $500 that unless it's something that's a family piece, it might have a particular memory for you or an association, then it's fine. But you know, if you or just have this table, you know, do you want to spend $500 on this table, or could you find something else for $300 or $400 that's in the condition that you need that you might be just as happy, if not more happy with?
I have some Headwood Wakefield chairs that have the original no fabric covering them, and I don't like the color. What would you do?
If you have particularly good fabric that you don't like on a piece of upholstery, if it is something that, for instance, are you talking about chairs that you have a wrap that the insert then goes into the seat?
Yeah, it's the dog bones.
Okay,
So it's just
so
the
something
seat.
like that, if that's the original fabric to the chairs, but it's not something you want to do, spend a couple extra bucks. I've done this before. Take your upholsterer and just have them put a new seat bottom in it and upholster them and save the other seat bottoms. And then if you ever want to remarry the original seats back to them because you're maybe going to sell them, somebody else might appreciate it, you still have that original. The same if you've got a great piece of case goods that has a back on it and you just really want to use it to put your flat screen on it. You want to put your DVD player in or whatever. Don't put a hole in the back. Spend a few dollars, get a masonite back, put it on there, save the original back, put your holes in, and then if you ever need, put the original back, and you're all good to go.
Would it not be acceptable to just cover over?
Or you can cover over them, but you know, it's going to continue to wear underneath because of the abrasion. You know, and for the few dollars it would take to get a new plywood form to, you know, because they're probably going to have to refoam them anyway. The cost would be minimal, and then you'd have the best of both worlds.
Okay. We move on to some pictures that I think will give some folks in the room heartburn. And a couple of your flat roof. Not easy when it looks like this. I'm going to bring in Chris, Fritz, and Lou, our architects. This question: I am buying a mid-century modern home and know that it needs roof work. It is currently holding 2 to 3 inches of water. How do I choose a roofer, and what kind of roof should be put on? There is no attic space. Will I be able to add insulation? Well, first off, what do you guys think when you see pictures like that?
I want to grab my fishing pole and see if I can catch it.
And the photographs are beautiful.
That's kind of an Ansel Adams.
Well, the first thing I would recommend is if you've got a ponded roof like this and you haven't bought the house and you can inspect the inside, is it leaking? I mean, do you have an issue to start off with? And if it's not leaking, then you're not in that bad a shape. But beyond that, you got to get your push broom out and do that monthly until you can hire a roofer, because you can't let this be an ongoing issue, first and foremost.
There's 2 issues with this. One is it probably wasn't like this originally. It's, in the technical term, it's deflected over time, so it's like bowed down slightly. Doesn't mean it's structurally unsound, although there may be a structural issue, which you need to have an expert check on that. But there's 2 ways to deal with that. Either, depending on the condition, it could be jacked up, but that's probably the most invasive and problematic way to go. Or you could get a twofer, which would be to create a slight raised area that would drain to whatever drainage there is on it, whether it's central drains or perimeter drains, by placing insulation on, taking the roof off to the deck, wood deck, and placing styrofoam insulation on it, which is tapered. So that gives you insulation, and then new roofing over that. Plus, you're shedding the water. And if you think about it, you really should learn to love flat roofs, because if you think about it, almost every commercial building in the world has a flat roof, and they function just fine. So it can be, there are people who know how to do that kind of roofing, many commercial roofers, and there are solutions to this, and there are ways to maybe improve it or to do exactly the way it was originally designed and just repair it.
Are you comfortable sharing names of roofers who
Have
do
one
well
well
here?
on my head.
We actually talked about this, about putting resources on the CF3 website.
Yeah, there's a couple of roofers in town, THE or Malloy Roofing. I mean, first and foremost, if this is your roof or you're buying a house with this roof, you need to replace it. Point blank. You have to tear it up. Normally at this point, you're getting a membrane that's layered over possibly 2 or 3 older roofs. And by code, you can't have more than 2 roofs in most jurisdictions to begin with. So by taking the roof up, you would get down to the structure. You might have an opportunity to insulate in the actual, between the joists with a variety of different insulations. But then going on with the new roof, it's not going to be flat anymore. They are going to slope it with the tapered insulation that Fritz was talking about. And you know, in the end, you're going to have an investment, but you're going to have a peace of mind too that you don't have to get up there and sweep it off and have your neighbors laughing at you every 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
I've been in those shoes. So.
I've actually lived in 2 houses with flat roofs, and they were both mid-century. One was built in the 1850s, and the other was built in the 1950s. So flat roofs have been around for a long time. I mean, when you think about it, I lived in a brownstone in Brooklyn, and all those buildings had flat roofs. And actually, there's a little bit of history that a company in Cincinnati was one of the instrumental companies in the middle part of the 1800s that developed the technology to do flat roofs. So first of all, flat roofs have been around for a long time. And as Fritz said, they're very common in commercial structures. Okay, the problem if it comes in is that you're dealing with contractors who are used to working on a commercial scale and charging commercial prices. That's the real issue with flat roofs, is that they can be expensive. You know, when you have shingles on your roof, you can find anybody on the street with a pickup truck and a box full of tools that can do that. It's a little, you want to make sure you've got somebody who knows what you're doing. So I would get a couple names and get a couple numbers and just compare the bids and see what you're getting. There's not just one type of flat roofs. There are many different kinds of flat roofs. There's a built-up roof that's layers of asphalt roofing that get tarred together, and then gravel gets put on top. There's synthetic roofs that are have fewer joints between the sheets of the roofing that go together. There's different ways to attach it. So it kind of depends on the specific application, whether it's something that you're going to be seeing the roof from above. If it sits down on a hill, for instance, like my house does, you might want to consider staying with a built-up roof that has gravel on top. It looks a little bit nicer. You can do the insulation, as Fritz said, above the roof deck so that it pitches at like 1/4 inch per foot to the drain. The good thing about flat roofs is you can actually get up and inspect your roof. So as Chris said, you want to get up if you've got a roof and take a look at it. The common points where there's failure are if there's ponding on the roof, and that works its way underneath the seams where the roofing material comes together. That's an opportunity for leaking. The other opportunity is when you have flashing, like at a chimney, or where there's a roof penetration where a pipe comes through the roof. And I can tell you, you've got the same problems with a shingle roof at those locations as you do with a flat roof. So there's nothing inherently more leak prone in that respect. In fact, the house I live in now, 1950s house, part of it's flat roof, part of it's an asphalt shingle that's pitched, and the problems with water infiltration that we've had are all in the asphalt shingle part of the roof. So I'd say don't be afraid of a flat roof. Understand, why did architects do flat roofs? Well, that's a good question for a residential house. It's probably because they look cool. Maybe in the mid-century too, there was this idea that it was kind of like this modern technology, so there was this kind of desire to do that as well. And that's why I think, people still respond to that aesthetic, right? That's why we're all interested in mid-century modern. You just have to understand going in that there's a commitment there that you've got to make, and you might be spending a little bit more money on the roof. You're probably not going to find a guy with a pickup truck that can do it, so you're going to be looking for somebody who's established. But they just back up their work. And the last thing I would say is, if you are having work done on your roof, just pay attention when the guys are there, because no matter what company you're working with, the job is only going to be as good as the guys that they send out to do your particular project. And you don't want to hover over contractors, but if you can just kind of keep an eye, like when I had some work done on my roof, they showed up with a gravel truck, and I looked at the gravel, and they were ready to dump it on my driveway, and it was the wrong size gravel, and I said, hey guys, you know, that gravel's got to go. And so, and they realized they made a mistake ordering the gravel, and they replaced it, and it was good that I was there because I caught it before they dumped it onto the driveway, and then they would have had to shovel it back in. So you want to, you know, if there's something that doesn't look right, you don't want to hover over the workers, but you know, just kind of keep an eye on things and make sure things are going smooth, and ask questions if you need to.
Before we move from the roof, any questions?
Well, I've got a quick question. Oh, I just wanted to ask, isn't it a good idea if you're going to do that to maybe spend a few dollars up front and hire an architect to help advise you on that process, not only for the referrals, but, you know, on sloping and structural issues, so that you don't make that $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 mistake and find out a few years later that you didn't do it right?
We'll never do anything without an architect.
But in all honesty, for a few $100s in a consulting fee and helping you out, it can go a long way to saving you thousands of dollars in a contractor's error. And the last thing I want to add on flat roofs, having gone through it myself personally, it's a long adventure. It's not an exact science, and normally the roofers have to work under the constraints of weather. So expect that you are going to be inconvenienced for a chunk of time, too. And these roofers, they don't work unless they know it's a sunny day, because if they get rained on during a replacement of this, it can be really bad. And they normally patch it together in chunks of area and do day by day and seal it up as they go.
So yeah, that's a good point too. I wanted to mention that. Yeah, if you can schedule, if you know you're going to do, it's not emergency work, think about trying to do it when the temperatures are moderate temperatures, and it's probably going to be dry. So fall is probably the best time in theory to do that. You know, and that'll save you a lot of headaches as well.
I just wanted to say something about aesthetics. Lou mentioned briefly, like, why did architects ever do flat roofs? There's a couple of different sources or history to it. If you think about the word skyscraper, and if you go down to Cincinnati to the corner of 4th and Walnut and look up, those buildings were the earliest skyscrapers. And if it's a cloudy day and the clouds are rolling by, just look up, and at the cornice level, it looks like it's scraping the sky. It literally looks like a scraper because the clouds are moving, the building's not. And so that's where that term came from. The other thing is Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright, who was a modernist architect, probably one of the originals, he banished basements and attics. He thought that they were a waste of space. So that and obviously he was extremely influential. So that's partly where this mid-century push came for the flat roof, because it was everything about much about the mid-century was about efficiency and do more with less, which is kind of the reverse of the way things are today. Although after this recent economy, we're starting to think like that again. So it was an efficiency idea that also had an aesthetic to it.
But in the interest of keeping things moving along, we're going to go from the roof to your windows. And a question for you, Judith, on window treatments.
Well, mid-century homes as a rule don't really accentuate windows like a Victorian home. You don't have the heavy molding and whatnot. So my suggestion to you is to go simple. Blinds are always a way to go. There's several different versions up there. You can go from very expensive, which is the Mecco shade you see there, or you can go to IKEA and get a very inexpensive one, sort of like this one here. The point being is, you want it to be the background, you don't want it to be the focus point, because mid-century homes generally have large windows, and the whole point is to bring inside and outside together and to kind of just, you know, create an atmosphere, an overall atmosphere as a backdrop.
I'll add to that. I mean, typically in a modern house, you're signing up to live in a fishbowl, and that's not always ideal for you.
Right. And
there, you can do some other window applications like frosting the glass to get kind of a, you know, a glowing effect, or get that that privacy screen as well. It's very cost effective, and if you do it in the right spots, it can help your house's aesthetic from the exterior too.
Just keep it simple.
I would point out that, look up the case study houses in Los Angeles after World War II. I think it was Craig Elwood who really used frosted glass beautifully.
What would you recommend for a bedroom, where you want some privacy, but the window, it's one big one and then two on the side, you can open the original windows?
Well, actually, there's a bedroom, or Susan, go back where there's the room and shades. That's our home, and actually we had an issue with that. It's a 10-foot window, it's 3 sections. We found 3 blinds. Actually, we didn't have a lot of money to spend at the time, so we went online at JCPenney. We did their whole 10-foot window for less than $100. And they're just room and shades.
The one is about 6 feet though.
But they'll do custom.
They will.
Mm-hmm. They'll do custom, and they're very inexpensive, and they're nice for the price,
Venetian blinds were also very of the period.
Yes, you had a question?
I was hoping we could move from the inside to the outside for a second. We were hoping that you would talk maybe about window replacement. We have a 1956 ranch that has a 14-foot window in the front of the house, and as much as I love single pane, in Cleveland it's not, we change our furniture based on the season because you don't want to sit near that window. JCPenney's has been a great resource. We actually have thermal curtains which do some of the trick, but we have metal casement windows, and we love to keep that same look, those same divisions, and the V word keeps coming up wherever we look, and we don't want vinyl. So I'm very hopeful that your resources will list some companies, but have you had any luck or?
A great alternative to vinyl is a fiberglass window. They're dimensionally, thermally very stable. They're typically, sometimes have a decent price point. Windows are one of the more expensive items in a building. So it's definitely a challenge. Another thing I would think about is the cost projection of, okay, we spend $10,000 replacing windows. How long is the energy savings going to take to equal that? Our house, as you can see from that other picture, has jalousie windows everywhere. And they're authentic and they're cool. Our house is like a Florida house in Kentucky. We're starting to get to the point where we're seriously thinking about replacing them. And I'm thinking about, you could also go with commercial, but that would be really expensive.
I know, I wish they were $10,000.
It sounds like you're talking, you have windows with metal frame, it's a metal frame window, not like a wood or a clad kind of situation. So there are, like Hope's Windows makes metal frame thin divisions. Getting an insulated metal frame thermal break in it, which is what keeps it warmer on the inside, is very expensive. I mean, it's the most expensive kind of window you can get. So if you're looking for comfort and, the sky's the limit, that's the approach I would take. If there's some other, if you can't replace it, and in fact, some of you may be familiar with the Rat House, right? That's just been restored, and it's actually on the CF3. They replaced the steel frame windows in this house with more energy efficient, and I know CF3 did some things out there, and it's just a very expensive thing to do. So, there might be some kind of way to, retrofit it like a storm window type situation, but
the other thing, if I could jump in, like Pella makes a architectural series windows that actually replace the casement windows and look dead on them, and typically your metal casements are painted anyway, so you're not getting very much value out of the metal. But a typical Pella reinstall on a 2,000 square foot modern house, I'm going to say is between $25,000 and $30,000. You could put a geothermal boiler system or heating system into your house, and just crank the energy into it out of the ground versus trying to replace the windows. And it might be an obtuse theory for some people, but in many cases, I know like the Frank Lloyd Wright House in Clifton, I've been trying to convince the homeowners, just put a geothermal system in, quit trying to deal with all the single pane glass. Just pump the energy out of the ground for a very low cost and you'll get a quicker return. But if you want to replace the windows, if you want to replace the windows, you can do them one by one too. Pella will work with you, because I've had a quote on our house, and we have the same, you get the iced up, when it starts to get cold, and there's always that huge radiant coldness coming through, and I'm looking at the government tax incentives to put a geothermal system in. Why deal with the windows? Just pump more heat into the house and be comfortable.
I do think that's one of the most difficult issues for a modern homeowner. The roof is one thing, but insulating the walls and having more energy efficient windows, that can be a real challenge. And in fact, that's a challenge with any kind of historic building going back, and there's really kind of serious limitations on what you can do to insulate walls and also with the windows and still keep the historic character of the house. The best bet is usually to try to do something at the roof, because that's where most of your heat's coming off. But you're right, it's not so much the air temperature, it's the radiant temperature, of a window that's at 30, degrees, and if you're standing by it, that it's just sucking heat out of your body into the atmosphere at that point, no matter what the air temperature is.
And are you guys in your field hearing any discussion of tax credits perhaps on the horizon that would make this,
right now,
take some of the pain? I mean, it's not going to get rid of all of it, but at least take some of the sting.
Right now, a geothermal system gives you a 33% tax credit, I believe it is. So if you're spending $38,000, the government gives you $10,000 of that back. So you're spending $20,000 to put a geothermal system. Now, you'll have costs related to running the electric pump that's pumping the air or water through the system, but it's kind of a new theory that some people might not agree with, but I'm more into, the houses were designed in a energy is limitless kind of mindset. We're kind of there with some of the sustainable options we have, so why not look at it a little differently? Because replacing windows, it's quite an endeavor. I know I don't have $30,000 to go, out and do that.
Let's move on to kitchens, which is a hot button issue for a lot of people. And photograph here, 1954 house, very typical type of discovery for a lot of people. Asbestos tile floors in bad shape, and the whole kitchen feels and looks outdated. I love the metal cabinets, but would like the kitchen to have a more modern feel. What would be the best place to start the work, and what suggestions do you have?
Well, with the asbestos, the best thing to do is, one, don't let it scare you, because this is just my personal opinion. The whole asbestos thing is exaggerated, and just take it with a grain of salt. The best thing to do is just cover it up. We had asbestos tile in our lower level, and we just put carpet and slate on top of it. If it's still well adhered, it's not crumbling, it makes a great substrate, just like anything else. So, and if you have a leveling issue, which Chris and I were talking about this at his house, you can just cover it up with the leveling compound and then put your flooring on top of it.
And Kit, let's open it up since we've all dealt with kitchens here. What do you think?
The cabinets are awesome. It's almost like I would want to keep those and reuse them and maybe try and reskin the room, but to do that you're probably going to have to remove everything out, restore the cabinets, maybe you want to paint them, add a different hardware, but they're so vernacular to the time period. It's like they have to stay. And the Formica stainless steel banded tops, maybe go all stainless with those or replace the laminate to some of the Formica boomerang, some of the old retro series that have been released. And I think for the bang for your buck, kind of reskinning the surfaces, new appliances and restoring the cabinetry would be the way I would go with this one.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I would not do a stone countertop in this, or really, I mean, I wouldn't say I would never do it in a mid-century house, but I think, I don't think it's generally the look that you want. First of all, I would say these cabinets, I would say, are salmon, not pink. And just a little, thing to help sell it to the husband. But, you know, obviously I think replacing the appliances would be the first step in this, and putting something over the asbestos tile. Like Fritz said, with asbestos, if you're not going to disturb it, it's better to leave it and cover it over. And that's actually the recommendation. If you go on like the EPA website, they recommend just keeping it in place. If it is going to be disturbed or it is flaking off, or in particular in your basement, if you've got something that you think is asbestos pipe wrap, you know, you want to have that checked out, and that's probably something that I would go ahead and have that removed and professionally removed. Yeah.
By law, depending on the situation, by law, you have to have it professionally removed in some cases.
And if I may add, during our preparation for this, the things that kept coming up over and over, particularly with regard to kitchen, is context. You look at the context of your home. So what you do, you want to respect that. You want to have something that is appropriate. It doesn't have to be a replication, but it needs to be appropriate, and it needs to respect the integrity of what's there. I mean, the same type of things that drew you to this mid-century house are probably going to lure the same buyer to your home should you choose to sell it. So, you know, if you are respectful and appropriate and keep the context in mind of what you're doing, then I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. Let the house tell you what it wants. Seriously, think about that.
Well, this is another house. Another big change that you can make is lighting. So here's the kitchen before, and here's the same kitchen with the same cabinets. There's bathroom. Different countertops, different appliances, lighting.
Well, the other thing too is if you're not crazy about the cabinetry in the kitchen and you want to have the opportunity to maybe switch out, be cognizant, you know, go with a simple style, but also you can repurpose those cabinets in another area of your home, you know, like your laundry room or something. You can sand them down lightly and paint them. So, you know, a lot of folks want to do that too. Again, it's keeping the product in the home. That's the main idea.
Just real quick to go up and down the table, your feelings as far as examples of mistakes people make in redoing their kitchen.
Going to Lowe's.
What are the things?
Yeah.
Going to Lowe's.
Going to Lowe's.
Carry cabinets, granite corners.
Yeah.
It goes back to what I said.
Yeah.
Inappropriateness and
Well,
things
but
being out of context.
specifically, what are the things?
Well, I mean,
To me, I think whenever you make something look like today,
Yeah.
then it's going to be immediately dated to that point in time. So you can't aim for today, you need to aim for, you know, like Fritz said, the appropriateness of the house.
I mean, how many of you bought a mid-century house from the 50s that when you went in and the kitchen had been redone in the 70s and perhaps it had a Spanish or a French provincial kitchen or something that just totally was inappropriate? I mean, if you respect the clean, simple lines of the design of your house in the design of your kitchen with appropriate materials, you can't go wrong.
Keep it simple. You can never go wrong with keeping it simple. You know, there's a reason like the shaker furniture and things of other periods that are so simplistic. They're beautiful in design and form. That's what you want to do.
Do your research too. Go back, get some copies online or whatever of like old House Beautiful magazines. They publish several books. There wasn't really one. There was one basically overarching style, but there were little variations on that, even at the time period. And see if something like that makes sense.
The last thing I would offer is don't let a contractor convince you that they can do it and make it nice and cool, like some of the examples we're going to see. Take the time to hire a design professional. You're paying a very small fee that is probably going to save you money through errors the contractor would make themselves.
Let me just make a comment about that, because that is a real, throughout the whole thing, that is something you really, with the roofs or whatever, you have to remember that contractors often are frustrated. They may have a little design aesthetic in their minds, you know, and they're frustrated with that. They're frustrated with architects, they're frustrated with homeowners. Plus, they're always wanting to find the easy way out for two reasons. One, it's less labor, and two, they can save money. So you really need to take anything a contractor says with a grain of salt and think about their motivation. I'm not against contractors at all, but really the best ones are wanting to work with you, not talk you into stuff. Yeah, molding was invented
covers a
to,
multitude of
exactly, that's why it was invented, it covers up cracks. So they want to put molding up because it's so much easier to hide a problem.
Let's move on to a portion of the program we call Love It or Lose It. And this is not in reference to somebody in your life, this is all about
We'll kind of play off of what David said, or if something was redone in the 70s, what do you do? That's kind of a no-brainer, but when you have something that's original to your house, but maybe not quite the quality, hasn't really stood the test of 50 or 60 years, what do you do with it? Sometimes the question is just a no-brainer, and sometimes it's not. So this is just going to be a little slideshow where you can weigh in on whether you should love it. This bath is 60 years old. It is in nearly perfect condition.
Paint, sink,
It
potty,
is,
and
and some
soap.
people will look at all that pink stuff and go, no, I can't go with it, but it's in such perfect condition, you have to learn to like it.
What's the feeling in the room?
Amen to that. And-
Love it?
Love it.
Love it.
We can just go this or that.
These crane sinks, they're going to outlive all of us, I think. They're really the only fixtures that I've seen that have stood up time and time.
This big problem here is color.
It's actually the original boomerang Formica, which they have reissued, I believe, in the same color.
Again, do your research because, you know, if you get like with the pinks or whatever, they were all about color at this period because they could do it for the first time in forever.
Another completely original kitchen, original appliances. I think the biggest problem with this one is lighting. It's very dark.
Yeah, David brought up a really good point. We talked about this kitchen earlier, and he even suggested going with aniline dye. You might want to.
Yeah, you could possibly aniline dye the cabinets, not terribly dark, but that allows the wood grain. And even if you didn't want to do that, the best thing you could do would get some uplighting, reflective uplighting, simple chrome bars if need be, that simply would take light and hit the ceiling and give you a nice ambient glow. It would lighten up the whole room, not only physically, but visually. And it would make that wood less oppressive and just give it an open feel without having to remove the original woodwork.
Susan, the one that's too back, the kitchen that had the, we've seen that house in Clifton. That countertop is what you're calling retro, Chris? Is that the retro? That was replaced, wasn't it?
That's actually the original.
That was,
But they are making that same
Formica
Formica
mix.
for their whatever Formica.
I've seen that and I thought it looked new.
Yeah. Yeah, that, I mean, some of the original Formicas were incredibly beautiful.
You have to remember, they did a lot of this stuff because it was the first time they could technically do it, and everybody was just enamored with it.
What about this bathroom? We call that an opportunity.
Yes.
Same as this.
Yes. 70s foil.
As you can see, it's little naked guys taking bubble baths.
Seemed like a good idea.
This is a house in Madeira, but
Yep.
unfortunate use of materials.
It needs an intervention.
They got it. This is a case where the quality, just the
Yeah.
tile application.
You know, and you have to remember, just because it's old, this was any time period, doesn't mean it was done right the first time or that it was super high quality either.
This one's a little bit tougher call, the cabinets aren't in great shape, but
The upper ones.
Yeah, the uppers are awesome. There's a lot of authenticity is kind of a word. It's like, what exactly does it mean? But there's a lot of authenticity to this in terms of the original style.
Is that kitchen that's all original?
yeah.
And I would say, the other thing I think you do have to make some consideration about is the condition of the cabinets and just the functionality of it. So if you do have the, a situation like this where I think aesthetically, it maybe needs to be freshened up a little bit, but, the real question would be, are the cabinets falling apart? Are there problems with it? Or is there damage that you might want to replace? And then really kind of use what's there as the spring point to replace it. And like Chris said, really take the time to find something that's just not maybe off the shelf at the local home builder store, but find something that's appropriate for the period, and go with that.
Yeah, I do too.
There's a square tub on the wall.
What I always look for in a ceramic tile is when the tile has this kind of three-dimensional quality, where it's got that kind of slightly rounded edge, it feels thicker and more substantial, and that's the tile that you want to keep. If it's just the kind of flat American Olean,
And you're right.
similar look, similar color, but there's a, it's one of those things where when you look really closely, even in this thing, you can see it looks like the tiles have that kind of sculpted quality that's, I think, what I would look for.
And you're right, that tile's usually set into concrete, you can't just pop it off the wall.
Yeah. Well, there is an interesting thing about this time period. Usually through the 50s and into the early 60s, the quality of materials was really high, and typically the applications were really pretty skillful. You get into the late 60s and into the 70s, and the quality just nosedives. I'm not quite sure what was going on, whether it was economy or they thought they could do more with less, but even interior doors and all kinds of things, just the quality went down.
Well, I think what happened is after World War II, you started to get mass-produced houses, the classic image of Levittown in New York, which started maybe in the lower end of the housing market. Some of those techniques started to work their way into more high-end things. I would say, a lot of the examples of mid-century modern in Cincinnati are kind of one-off designs where there was either an architect or some kind of designer involved. And they were probably behind the curve of where the builders, commercial residential builders, were, and they were probably using older, kind of construction techniques, still a little bit into the late 50s and 60s, whereas the commercial builders had already started to shift over. There's a world of difference between a house that was built in 1958 and one that was built in, say, the mid-60s, late 60s. It's just
So
that
if we go back to that countertop, what's our feeling on that?
Love it.
Yeah,
Love
that's
it.
authentic.
Yeah, I have never seen this from my guy. I actually just snapped this on my phone when I was showing the house one day because I thought it was like a harbor print.
Yeah, it's very
that looks to me more like the flat kind of tile that, I would think I would feel better if I going in and replacing that. But if it needed, if the condition warranted it, that would be my big thing. I would really look more towards the condition.
That's great.
Yeah.
This is cool.
Yeah, this was a Janelle Anderson.
Do we want to?
This kitchen's a bit of a 80s redo. I believe it was the original cabinets and the original configuration that have been refaced. Again, I think kind of an opportunity to either take it back or take it forward.
Yeah, update the hardware. And just think back to that one picture, that lighting can do a world of good. And lighting is kind of an art, I mean, you need some professional help helping you figure out how lighting levels, and you need an interior designer to really give you some feedback on this. This guy's authentic, though. It's not a pine, but it's just really Ozzie and Harriet.
And I believe that's an original marmoleum floor. Love it, lose it, what do you guys think?
Lose it.
Where's it?
Ooh, nice.
This one's actually gone. They lost that.
I mean, the
I thought it was pretty cool.
unfortunate ceiling and kind of cornice treatment is,
Yeah.
I think, what's bringing this thing down.
And the hardware.
Is there an aftermarket off for any of those appliances? I mean, is anybody taking them in town rather than just throwing them away?
Building value that supports Easter seals, Habitat for Humanity Restoring.
As far as the
Wonderful
collectible,
resources.
Either, I mean,
Yeah, I've known people who've tried to donate it for the collectible value, and there really just doesn't seem to be.
Even in our group, there's people who had really unusual hang-on-the-wall refrigerators and stuff that they've tried to see if somebody else wanted. And I don't think there's been a lot of success.
The wildest thing I've ever seen was a kitchen that had this panel that flipped down. When it flipped down, they were electric burners, and that was the stove.
Since we're tight on time, you want to jump to your quick fixes?
Close to this.
Oh,
Oh, wait a minute, homeowner's here. Cool bath.
I want to
Go back.
No, the next one. I want to replace the tub in there, but it would mean moving some of those tiles and, I don't know what you do. Maybe
You want a bigger tub, or you
No.
want to resurface it?
I want to replace it. I could just resurface
It's
it,
gonna
but
take a lot of work to salvage that tile, but it could be done. It's just gonna take a lot of labor to scrape it
we'll
off.
talk enough.
Actually, we're thinking about doing this in our bathroom too, and I think Dremel tool comes to mind. It
Well-
would be a surgical thing.
The thought immediately comes to my mind without seeing it. If there's no way to save the tile, you don't have to get rid of all of it. You could actually take the white or the gold and remove it up from the floor up to the point where you need it for the tub, and then take a solid of one of the two and replace and band that below, and then you could keep most of the original
Even though
tile.
it's never going to match,
Yeah.
because it's those.
But you could take that third tertiary color in that range, and then you'll have a band from that point down, and at least.
And sometimes it's better to go, if you can't get an exact match, go with contrast.
Yeah, exactly.
You just, I mean, it takes a little finesse, but.
It has. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, built in, yeah,
Bathroom.
the classic corner toe.
Yeah, this bathroom.
Yeah, that's beautiful, absolutely simple, and of the period.
So these are quick fixes that we're.
We did not put those things in there. Again, a little bit of a lesson in maybe using inappropriate materials.
And scale.
Scale and form. I mean,
I keep thinking cereal rolls.
This is actually in the same house.
This is great though. Conceptually, it's even. Nice. Yeah. Now that might even be a rich seminar. See how clean and just simple?
So we get some updates with flooring, we get some countertop,
Look at those
lighting.
cool cabinets. Yeah, well, what century is this?
Okay, somebody has a right on kitchen.
Which might be perfect for Jay's show.
That's too much.
Whose house is this?
Okay, quick before and after. Some of these are major fixes, some of these are very easy, quick fixes. This is a Jim Alexander house in Wyoming. Decent kitchen. Little built-in cupboard there. This is the kitchen now.
Sometimes you need a design professional to kind of see
That's
the
what this
vision.
was. IKEA cabinets with the design professional. This is a kitchen that had been redone probably in the 80s in a mid-century house.
Actually, it was original. This was the original kitchen before.
Okay. All right. So there was
I
a
think
wall
a
between
housekeeper
them.
could just do wonders with that kitchen.
Okay, and so there was a wall between that kitchen and the dining room and now.
Yeah.
Again, a architect and IKEA cabinetry is behind the line size counter.
How are the IKEA cabinets holding up if you've had enough years putting them
I
in?
have not seen any of them fail. I have not seen.
I have a quick take on IKEA cabinets. If you don't like them in 10 years, go buy new doors.
Yeah.
Change the style.
And
It's right up the road.
And if you spend a couple of extra dollars at IKEA, like that's gonna break the bank, they do actually have some that are hardwood solids or more wood-based,
There's
as
actually-
opposed to the melamine ones that you might want to avoid unless that's your only
There's
option.
a vendor in Atomic Ranch who does custom doors for IKEA cabinets.
Yeah, and then the best thing is, they're great boxes, so you can customize them very easily. And there's also another cabinet resource here in town that has a lot of very nice cabinetry for not much difference in price than IKEA, with a lot of options too.
And make sure that your marriage or your relationship is strong enough to handle some of the IKEA cabinets, because it's like wallpapering, it's the test of a marriage.
That's true of anything.
Yeah, Kate, I agree. I mean, we had somebody come in and it,
So, yeah, I get
life was a lot happier in our house.
Here's a very quick fix. This is the before. Check out the lighting. This is after. I mean, that's really literally just changing out the lights. And those are $60 light fixtures. This is a kitchen at Ben Dunbar House. It had wood trim on the lower cabinets. It had someone that put in a granite counter in this dropped lighting box. Just by getting rid of the dropped lighting box, white quartz counters, huge difference, painting the wood trim.
Incredible. That's a really good point. See, the lower cabinets are just painted out. My son and daughter-in-law have a house in Connecticut. It was a 50s split level, and it had all this 80s cabinetry. They just painted it, and it looked incredible. You could, the whole panel just kind of disappeared.
Susan, could you go back and forth between those kitchens once, please?
This one?
Yeah, what's the before and after?
There's the before. Same cabinets, the appliance, a couple of appliances.
Nothing's on the counter.
Well, that helps a lot. And those Granny Smith apples.
And a different, a different white